New York State is now facing a lawsuit from 5 Western New York families over the way that charter schools are funded. That suit claims that students at charter schools receive less funding per student than their public school counterparts. Those families say that the difference in funds actually gives less opportunity to students of color and students who come from low-income families. Here to talk with me more about this is Northeast Charter Schools Network President Kyle Rosenkrans and also the group's legal director, Harold Hinds. Did I get this right, Hinds?
You did.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, both of you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So first, I guess, Kyle, we'll start with you. I mean, this isn't a new phenomenon. I mean, we've been funding charters the way that we've been funding them in New York since, well, the day that charters became legal, right?
That's right.
So what it took so long to come to this conclusion that this was actually against the Constitution?
Right. So my organization is the Charter Association for all the schools across the state. And we've been working for coming on 15 years to make a dent in this problem, and we've been working with lawmakers in Albany. So we've tried it that way, and the gap persists. So we made a decision in working with the parents at many of our member schools to take this to the next level and to bring this before the courts and ask the courts to step in and come to the right conclusion.
And one of the reasons you've got families from Buffalo is because Buffalo is where the gap is the most significant.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's
What
right.
is it exactly?
The gap, charter students in Buffalo receive 3/5 of the funding that their friends and neighbors who go to district schools receive.
So this is interesting. From a legal standpoint, it strikes me that this is much the same legal argument that was made in the CFE case, right? I mean, which is a public school case from New York City, which folks I'm sure remember, and now there's a companion case for upstate school funding, but basically says that constitutionally, under the state constitution, the state is mandated to provide a sound basic education, and it's not, effectively, because of its education funding formulas. That's fundamentally the same argument that you're making here, yes?
There are some key similarities to CFE. You're right. One, I guess, quick point. You noted that was the case for public schools. Charters are public schools as well.
Right. That's right.
But there are indeed similarities. We are arguing, much as was the case in CFE, that the formula does not enable our schools to provide students with a sound basic education. A critical difference, however, is unlike CFE, we are not saying that our schools are failing. They're not. The formula, however, disenables our schools from providing critical resources that the court in CFE noted as being necessary to provide students with a sound basic education.
So that's a fascinating point that you bring up, actually, because if you look at the scores, which we've been doing now, and teacher performance evaluations, et cetera, charter students are doing quite well.
They are.
So one might argue that you don't actually need any more money. You're doing fine with what you've got. You're doing more than fine with what you've got.
Right. And we get that question a lot. Here's how I look at it. We're doing more with less right now. Our teachers, our school leaders, our boards, our parents, they're doing more with less. They're working miracles. So imagine what we could do with equal funding. That's what this case is about. It's students who have been shortchanged for years, have worked with everyone in this state to find a solution, and have come up short. So now we're asking the courts to step in.
Piggybacking off of that, let's also not forget about the over 50,000 students on wait lists who are not enrolled in charter schools and trying to find a way in, many of whom are in failing schools with parents who are really desperate to try and find a way out of those systems.
Now, I don't know if you guys saw the statement from AQE, which of course
Yes,
is, okay, good. So, you know, just so people remember, this is an organization that is sort of vehemently advocating for public schools, for more funding for public schools, say that schools are already being shortchanged, and also closely aligned with NECSN, the teachers union. Their argument is that actually charter schools are sort of funded, can receive private funding, and you can, correct? Which is something that technically speaking, a public school can't, because actually parent organizations in New York City are raising funds all the time.
Right. That's absolutely right.
And they use it but not for education purposes inside the classroom, right? Which is different for a charter.
No, that's actually not totally accurate. So charters and district schools can all raise private funds to go towards educational programs. And when you look at it statewide, statistically, charters actually raise less in private funds than district schools. So the proportion of our funding that comes from private sources is minuscule, less than 10%. So we look at this completely differently, and notwithstanding the sound bites and any of the critiques we've seen come out of this, if you look at the substance of this case and what these parents are advocating for is equal treatment for our students.
Dollar for dollar. You just want charter school kids to get the same. Now, and also this funding follows the student, correct? That's how it works?
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct.
So we also hear from the public school advocates or the anti-charter advocates or whatever you'd like to call them, is that you know, public schools don't have a choice about who they get to take, and charter schools do. You can be more selective, and so therefore you're doing better because you have a higher quality of student, if you will.
That's actually not true. Charters have a minor degree of leeway, I guess I'd say, for students that may have siblings in the school. But in terms of who they can enroll, charters are structured to go by lottery systems, and they have to accept students based on whoever comes in the door, whoever applies to the school. They cannot make distinctions based on race, based on disability, based on any of the criticism that we oftentimes see levied against us.
Do you actually think that the funding formula as it exists should continue? I mean, you're saying within the confines of the funding formula, we would like to have a one-for-one match, the same thing that the traditional public school kids are getting. But there are people who criticize the whole formula period. I mean, would you be adverse to blowing up the thing and starting all over again?
We think our first priority here is we're a charter school association. The parents that we're working with are parents of children in charter schools. So we're focused on this part of the issue. And I'm actually very heartened that there's lots of people across the state that are advocating for fair funding for all kinds of public schools, and ultimately because that's in the best interest of children. So anything that moves the needle in closing this gap between charter students and district students, we would be in favor of.
And what about, I mean, you're actually in-house counsel, correct, for the organization?
In many respects, yeah.
Okay, there's also outside counsel, so who's paying for this whole thing?
Our organization is paying for it as the charter association.
And it could take some time, right? I mean, that's always the problem. When you go to court, you can get, well, appeals and then more appeals, and you can battle it out for months. I mean, CFE took years. This small cities school district lawsuit is taking quite a bit of time. Meanwhile, there's kids and they're moving through the system and they're not getting any relief. So why go in this direction?
Well, we think like any movement before, this is we're gearing up for a long, hard battle, but we think that this is ultimately the right place to go. And so there's a scenario in which lawmakers in Albany could fix this immediately. If we hope that happens, but if it doesn't, we have to resort to the courts, and that's what we've done here today.
Well, we'll be following the case then, and I thank you both very much for being with me. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, coming